The nebula's edge was the kind of bar where trouble usually started with a drink and ended with someone calling station security. Tonight felt different, though. The air was thick with more than just the usual mix of alcohol and alien breathing, gases. Hyunwoo sat alone at his corner table, fingers wrapped around a glass of synthetic ale that had long gone warm. He had finished his cargo run 3 hours ago, delivering medical supplies to the Outer Rim colonies. It was honest work, the kind that kept him busy and his mind off things he would rather forget. The bar buzzed with conversation in a dozen different languages. Nexus Station drew traders, diplomats, and travelers from across the galaxy. Most of them were decent enough, just trying to make a living or see the universe. But tonight, the loudest voices belonged to the ones who thought they owned it. The table closest to the main floor, 3 Vorthak officers sat with their crystalline bodies catching the bar's colored lights. Each one stood nearly 9 feet tall when upright, their transparent forms filled with swirling energy that pulsed with their emotions. Right now, those pulses were bright with amusement. Did you hear the latest from the Galactic Council? The largest Vorthak's voice rang like wind chimes in a storm. His name was Kethvar, and his rank insignia marked him as a commander in their space fleet. They actually approved humanity's full membership. The other Vorthaks made sounds that might have been laughter if they had throats. One of them, smaller but with brighter energy patterns, spoke up. Those primitive apes, what could they possibly offer the galaxy besides violence? At a nearby table, 2 Keth diplomats hissed their agreement. The reptilian species had smooth, scaled skin that shifted color with their moods. Right now, both were showing the deep purple of disdain. The female, Sisara, flicked her forked tongue in disgust. Humans are barely past their tribal stage, she said, her words carrying the slight lisp common to her people. Their entire history is nothing but war after war. They fight over everything: land, resources, ideas, even the color of their skin. Exactly my point, Kethvar boomed, his voice carrying across the bar. How can the Council expect civilized species to work with creatures who solve every problem with violence? They are like children playing with weapons. Hyunwoo took another sip of his ale and tried to focus on the star charts displayed on the wall screen. Tomorrow he had another run to make, this time carrying terraforming equipment to a new colony. World. Simple, peaceful work. I read their military history, said a new voice. This came from one of the Hive Lord warriors, an insectoid creature whose 4 arms ended in razor-sharp claws. In just their last century alone, they fought 2 global wars. Millions died. They even used atomic weapons on their own cities. Atomic weapons, Sisara repeated with horror. On their own people. What kind of species does that? A failed one, Kethvar declared. Evolution should have weeded out such aggressive tendencies millions of years ago. Any species that violent should have destroyed itself long before reaching space. The Hive Lord clicked his mandibles in agreement. My clutch mother always said that true intelligence means finding peaceful solutions. Violence is the last resort of inferior minds. Inferior minds and inferior genetics, added the second Keth diplomat. Look at them. Soft skin, weak bones, no natural weapons. They had to invent tools just to hunt their own planet's creatures. A properly evolved species develops natural advantages. Hyunwoo's knuckles went white around his glass. He had heard this kind of talk before, on other stations, in other bars. It was getting worse since humanity had joined the Council. Every species seemed to have an opinion about his people, and most of those opinions were not kind. The funniest part, Kethvar continued, his energy patterns now pulsing with bright yellow amusement, is that they think their military experience makes them valuable. They actually believe that their history of killing each other is something to be proud of. They call it combat experience, Sisara said, making air quotes with her clawed hands. As if murdering your own species is the same as tactical knowledge. My grandfather fought in the sector wars, said the smaller Vorthak. "Real combat against external threats, defending our colonies from the void pirates. That is honorable warfare. What humans do is just savage." The Hive Lord warrior leaned forward, his compound eyes glittering. "I heard that human military. Academies actually teach students how to kill with their bare hands. No weapons, no technology, just primitive violence. What civilized species need such training?" "None," Kethvar answered firmly, "because civilized species use their intelligence to avoid such situations. We negotiate, we compromise, we find peaceful solutions. Only animals resort to physical combat." Hyun-woo watched the condensation run down his glass and remembered his sister's graduation from the Terran Defense Academy. Da-eun had been so proud of her uniform, so excited about her first assignment to the Deep Space Patrol. She believed in humanity's place in the galaxy, believed they could prove themselves, worthy of respect. "The worst part is how they try to justify it," Sasara was saying. "They claim their aggression made them strong, made them survivors. But look around. We all survived to reach space without becoming monsters." "Exactly," agreed the Hive Lord. "The Keth achieved interstellar flight through diplomacy and trade. The Vorthak built their empire on scientific advancement and cultural exchange. Even my people, warrior-born though we are, learned to channel our instincts into protecting others, not destroying them." "But humans?" Kethavar's voice dripped with contempt. "They reached space by turning their own world into a battlefield and then deciding they needed more room to fight. They are not explorers or scientists or diplomats. They are just very successful barbarians. The bar had grown quieter as other patrons either left or moved to tables farther from the loud conversation. Even the bartender, an elderly Zenthari, with wise old eyes, had stopped his usual cheerful chatter with customers. Hyun-woo finished his drink and stood up slowly. He had cargo to check before tomorrow's departure, and listening to this was not helping his mood. As he reached into his pocket for payment, he heard Kethvar's voice rise again. "Mark my words. Humanity will be the Council's greatest mistake. Give them a few years in civilized space, and they will find an excuse to start another war. It is all they know how to do." The human pilot placed his payment on the table and walked toward the door, his footsteps silent on the metal deck plating. Behind him, the laughter and mockery continued. But he had heard enough. Tomorrow would bring another day, another cargo run, another chance to prove that not all humans were what these aliens thought they were. For now, he just wanted to get back to his ship and the peace of the cargo bay. He did not notice the young woman in a crisp military uniform who had just entered the bar, her eyes scanning the crowd until they found him. "Hyun-woo!" the voice called out across the bar just as he reached the door. He turned to see his sister Da-eun weaving between tables toward him, her new Terran Defense Academy uniform crisp and spotless. Da-eun looked exactly like their mother, had at that age, determined eyes, quick smile, and a stubborn set to her jaw that meant she was not easily discouraged. The gold insignia on her collar marked her as a fresh graduate, probably heading out on her first deep space assignment. "I was hoping I would find you here," she said, slightly out of breath. "Your ship's computer said you had finished the cargo run, and the dockmaster mentioned you usually came to this place." Hyun-woo managed a smile for his sister, the first genuine one he had worn all day. "Just finished up. What brings you to this part of the station? I thought your transport did not leave until tomorrow." "It does not, but I wanted to see you before. Shipping out. This is my first assignment to the outer territories, and I might not make it back to Earth for months." She glanced around the bar, taking in the mix of species and the general atmosphere. "This place has character. I will give it that." At the mention of Earth, the conversation at Kethvar's table grew louder. The Vorthak commander had clearly had more to drink since Hyun-woo had tried to leave, and his energy patterns were now pulsing with aggressive red hues. "Did someone say Earth?" Kethvar's voice boomed across the bar. The little blue world where the violent apes come from? Daun stiffened, her hand moving instinctively toward where a weapon would hang if she were on duty. Hyunwoo caught her wrist gently and shook his head. Not worth it. Let me buy you a drink, and we can go somewhere quieter. But Kethvar was not finished. The crystalline being rose to his full 9-foot height and began walking toward their table, his fellow aliens following behind like a pack sensing opportunity. Look at this, he announced to his companions, 2 humans, and one of them is wearing a military uniform. How perfect. The Keth diplomat Sisara slithered closer, her scales shifting to the bright orange of excitement. Oh, this is wonderful. We can ask her directly about human military training. Tell us, little soldier, how many of your own species did your people kill today? Dawan stood up straighter, her training kicking in. Sir, I believe there has been a misunderstanding. Humanity has moved beyond the conflicts of our past. We are now focused on exploration, trade, and peaceful cooperation with other species. This brought laughter from all the aliens present. The Hive Lord warrior clicked his mandibles in amusement. Peaceful cooperation? From the species that invented something called total war? Your own military history proves otherwise, Sisara added. I have read the reports. Your people have been in a state of warfare for over 90% of their recorded history. Even now, your military academies teach combat techniques that would be considered war crimes by civilized standards. Daun kept her voice level and professional. Respectfully, I think you may have some incorrect information. Human military training emphasizes protection of civilians, rules of engagement, and rules of engagement? Kethvar interrupted, his energy patterns now strobing with bright mockery. Is that what you call it when you drop atomic fire on cities full of children? That was over 80 years ago, Daun replied, her composure starting to crack slightly. Humanity learned from those mistakes. We established international laws, peace treaties, and then you immediately broke them to fight more wars, the Hive Lord warrior interjected. Your people cannot help themselves. Violence is in your nature, like breathing or eating. Hyunwoo placed a warning hand on his sister's shoulder, but she was too focused on defending their species to notice. This was exactly the kind of confrontation he had been trying to avoid. You are wrong about us, Daun said firmly. Yes, we have a history of conflict, but that history taught us the value of peace. Every human child learns about the costs of war. We remember so that we never repeat those mistakes. Children, Sisara repeated with disgust. That reminds me of something interesting I read. Human females are actually sent to military academies now. In most civilized species, females focus on nurturing and education. But humans are so naturally violent that even their breeding stock needs weapons training. The insult hit Daeun like a physical blow. Her face went pale, then flushed with anger. Around the bar, conversations died as other patrons sensed the growing tension. I am not breeding stock, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. I am a graduate of the Defense Academy, trained in space navigation, tactical planning, and emergency response. I earned my position through study and skill. Study and skill in killing, Kethvar corrected. What else would a military academy teach? Your entire species is nothing but barely civilized killers pretending to be explorers. We are more than that, Dawn insisted, but her voice was shaking now with suppressed rage. Humans have contributed art, music, literature, scientific discoveries, all built on foundations of violence, the Hive Lord said dismissively. Even your greatest achievements come from military research. Your space program began with weapons. Your computer technology came from code breaking during wars. Everything humans create is ultimately designed to help them kill more efficiently. Other bar patrons were now openly staring at the confrontation. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed entertained by the spectacle. The elderly Zenthari bartender was polishing the same glass over and over, his ancient eyes watching everything, with careful attention. "You know what I think?" Sisara continued, encouraged by Daun's obvious distress. "I think the council made a mistake accepting humanity. We should have waited another 1,000 years. Let them either evolve past their aggressive nature or destroy themselves trying. Either way, the galaxy would be safer." "Agreed," Kethvar boomed. "Humans are a threat to galactic peace. They will bring their wars with them wherever they go, corrupting civilized space with their primitive violence." Daun was trembling now, caught between her training, which demanded she remain professional, and her anger at hearing her species and her career dismissed so casually. "You do not understand us at all." "Oh, but we do," Kethvar replied, leaning down so his massive crystalline form loomed over her. "We understand perfectly. You are weapons that learn to walk upright. You are predators pretending to be civilized. And worst of all, you actually believe your own pretense." That was when Hyunwoo stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate, and somehow managed to draw every eye in the bar. He was not as tall as the aliens surrounding them, not as obviously powerful or threatening, but something in the way he moved, the careful control in every gesture, made the entire room go quiet. "Apologize to my sister," he said. His voice was calm, almost conversational, but it carried clearly through the suddenly silent bar. Kethvar straightened to his full height, his energy patterns now pulsing with aggressive challenge. "Or what, little ape? You will show us your famous human aggression? Prove our point for us?" The crystalline being spread his arms wide, addressing the entire bar. "Look, everyone! The peaceful human is about to demonstrate exactly what I was talking about. Violence is the only response they know." Around the bar, patrons leaned forward in anticipation. Some reached for communication devices, ready to call security or record what was about to happen. Others simply waited to see if the small human would actually challenge the towering alien warrior. Hyunwoo looked at his sister, saw the mixture of shame and anger in her eyes, then looked back at Kethvar. When he spoke again, his voice had not changed, still calm, still quiet, but somehow different. "Last chance," he said. Kethvar laughed, the sound like crystal wind chimes in a hurricane. His energy patterns flared bright white with amusement as he turned to address the watching crowd. "Did you all hear that? The little human is giving me ultimatums." He gestured, broadly with his massive crystalline arms. "This is perfect. We will finally see what human aggression really looks like when—" He never finished the sentence. What happened next took exactly 8 seconds, though most witnesses would later swear. It felt like both an eternity and an instant. The humans in the bar would remember every detail with crystal clarity. The aliens would spend weeks trying to understand what they had actually seen. Hyunwoo moved. There was no warning, no building rage, no dramatic preparation. One moment he was standing calmly beside his sister, and the next he was in motion with a fluidity that defied belief. His right hand caught the edge of the heavy metal table, the kind designed to withstand the weight and strength of a dozen different alien species. In one smooth motion, he flipped it up and forward, sending it spinning through the air like a massive disc. The table caught Kethvar's center mass with a sound like a gong being struck by a sledgehammer. The impact sent the 9-foot Vorthak stumbling backward, cracks appearing in his crystalline torso where the table had hit. Before he could recover, before he could even process what had happened, Hyunwoo was already moving to his next target. Sisara, the Keth diplomat, had been reaching for the plasma stunner holstered at her side. Her reptilian reflexes were fast, faster than most species could follow. But Hyunwoo was already there, his left hand closing around her wrist as she cleared the weapon from its holster. The human's grip was precise, calculated. He applied pressure to exactly the right point, and the stunner clattered to the floor as Sisara's hand went numb. Before she could hiss in pain or surprise, Hyunwoo had pivoted, using her own momentum to spin her around and redirect the weapon toward the approaching Hive Lord warriors. The first Hive Lord, the one who had been clicking his mandibles in amusement, just moments before, suddenly found himself staring down the barrel of a plasma stunner held in perfectly steady hands. He froze, his four arms spread wide, his compound eyes reflecting confusion and sudden fear. The second Hive Lord was already in motion, his razor-sharp claws extending as he lunged forward with the lightning-fast strike that made his species feared across 3 sectors. But Hyun-woo was no longer where the attack was aimed. The human had somehow moved aside while simultaneously grabbing a broken piece of the metal table, a thick leg that had snapped off during the impact with Kethvar. He swung it like a club, catching the attacking Hive Lord across his armored thorax with a sound like a hammer hitting stone. The warrior went down hard, his breath knocked out in a whistling wheeze through his breathing spiracles. Before he could recover, Hyun-woo had already turned toward the 3 remaining aliens who had been watching from nearby tables. 2 more Vorthak officers, both smaller than Kethvar but still towering over the human, had started to rise from their seats. They moved with the ponderous inevitability of their crystalline species, energy patterns flaring with combat readiness. Hyun-woo threw the table leg. It spun end over end through the air and struck the first Vorthak in the head with surgical precision. The alien's energy patterns flickered and went dark as he collapsed backward over his chair. The second Vorthak had just enough time to register what had happened to his companion before Hyun-woo reached him. The human vaulted over an overturned chair, landed in a crouch beside the alien, and drove his shoulder into the Vorthak's torso just above the point where his energy core was housed. The impact sent spiderweb cracks racing through the crystalline structure, and the alien's lights went out like a switched-off lamp. By now, alarms were starting to sound throughout the bar. The automatic security systems had detected the energy, signatures of a fight, and were alerting station security. But the fight, such as it was already over. Hyun-woo straightened up and looked around the bar with the same calm expression he had worn throughout the entire confrontation. 7 aliens, warriors, diplomats, and officers from 3 different species lay unconscious or disabled around the room. The human had not even broken a sweat. The silence in the bar was absolute. Every patron, every server, even the background music system seemed to have stopped working. The only sound was the soft hum of the station's life support systems and the distant wail of approaching security sirens. Da-Yun stared at her brother with wide eyes. She had seen combat training, had studied military tactics and hand-to-hand combat at the academy. But what she had just witnessed was something else entirely. This was not the aggression the aliens had been mocking. This was something far more dangerous. Controlled, precise, efficient violence applied with surgical accuracy. Kethvar groaned and tried to push himself up from where he had fallen. His crystalline body was spider-webbed with cracks, and his energy patterns flickered weakly. When he spoke, his voice was no longer booming with confidence. What are you?" he whispered. Hyun-woo looked down at the fallen alien commander with those same calm eyes. "I am a cargo pilot," he said simply. "I deliver medical supplies to colony worlds, carry terraforming equipment to new settlements, and transport trade goods between stations." He paused, then added quietly, "I used to do other work." The bar's doors burst open as station security arrived, a mixed squad of different species in full tactical gear. They swept into the room with weapons drawn, expecting to find a riot in progress. Instead, they found a quiet human standing amid a field of defeated aliens, looking like he was waiting for someone to bring him another drink. The security chief, a grizzled Zenthari veteran with scars across his furry face, took in the scene with experienced eyes. He had broken up thousands of bar fights in his career, but he had never seen anything quite like this. "Anyone hurt?" he asked, his weapon still drawn but pointed at the floor. Hyun-woo shook his head. "They will all recover. No permanent damage. The security chief looked at the unconscious aliens, then at the human, then back at the aliens. His translator was working perfectly, but he was having trouble processing what he was hearing. You did all this? They insulted my sister. The Zenthari's ears twitched, the equivalent of a raised eyebrow. In his experience, bar fights usually involved a lot more shouting, a lot more chaos, and a lot more actual violence. This looked more like a surgical strike than a brawl. Sir, I am going to need you to come with us for questioning, the security chief said. It was standard procedure, but something about the human's calm demeanor made him phrase it as a polite request rather than an order. Hyunwoo nodded and turned to his sister. Call Admiral So Young. Tell her what happened. She will know how to handle this. Da-eun found her voice at last. Hyunwoo, how did you... Her brother smiled, and for the first time since the fight began, he looked like the quiet cargo pilot she had always known. I will explain later. Right now, you should probably get back to your ship. You have an early departure tomorrow. As the security team led him away, Hyunwoo paused at the bar's entrance and looked back at the elderly Zenthari bartender who had watched the entire confrontation without moving from behind his counter. Their eyes met for a moment, and the old bartender nodded slowly, as if he understood something that everyone else had missed. Then Hyunwoo was gone, leaving behind a bar full of unconscious aliens and a galaxy that was about to learn something new about human aggression. The silence in the nebula's edge stretched on for nearly a full minute after the security team left with Hyunwoo. Patrons stared at the unconscious aliens scattered around the room, at the overturned furniture, at the cracked floor where Kethvar had fallen. No one seemed to know what to say or do. Finally, the old Zenthari bartender set down the glass he had been polishing and walked out from behind the counter. His movements were slow and careful, the walk of someone whose joints had seen better days but whose mind was still sharp. He approached the nearest unconscious Vorthak and checked for signs of life. They will all live, he announced to the room. Unconscious, maybe some bruises and wounded pride, but they will recover. A nervous Keth trader who had been hiding under his table slowly emerged. What just happened? That human... How did he move so fast? The bartender looked at the trader with ancient eyes that had seen more than most beings could imagine. You young ones, he said with a shake of his grizzled head. You look at humans and see only what you want to see. What do you mean? Asked a Hive Lord merchant from across the room. The old Zenthari gestured to the fallen aliens. These fools thought they understood human aggression. They saw human wars and called it primitive violence. They saw human conflicts and called it uncontrolled rage. He chuckled, a dry sound like sand through an hourglass. They understood nothing. Da-eun, who had been standing frozen since her brother left, finally found her voice. Sir, you know something about humans, don't you? The bartender looked at her with something that might have been sympathy. Child, I have been running bars on trade stations for over 200 years. I have seen every species in the galaxy when they think no one important is watching. I have watched civilizations rise and fall, seen species make first contact and last stands. He paused, then continued. And I have never seen anything quite like what your brother just did. What do you mean? She asked. Sit down, child. All of you, sit down if you want to understand what just happened here. The old bartender moved to the center of the room, where overturned chairs and broken furniture told the story of the brief fight. Let me tell you what I know about human aggression. Several patrons cautiously took seats, their eyes still darting between the unconscious aliens and the bartender. Da-eun sat on a bar stool, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. First, the Zenthari began, you have to understand what aggression really means. Every species in this galaxy has some form of it. The will to fight when threatened, the drive to protect what matters to them. But most species see aggression as something to be ashamed of, something to be controlled or eliminated. He gestured to Kethvar, who was starting to stir weakly. The Vorthak developed crystal bodies to make themselves harder to hurt, then convinced themselves that their lack of vulnerability made them more civilized. The Keth perfected poison and stealth, then told themselves that winning through trickery was more refined than winning through strength. And the Hive Lords? Asked the nervous trader. The Hive Lords bred themselves into perfect warriors then, created elaborate honor codes to convince themselves that their violence was noble and controlled. The old bartender shook his head. Every species found a way to be aggressive while pretending they were above aggression. Dayun leaned forward. But humans are different. Humans are honest, the Zenthari replied simply. They look at their capacity for violence and do not pretend it is something else. They do not dress it up in honor codes or technological advantages or cultural superiority. They simply accept that they are dangerous and then spend enormous effort learning to control that danger. He walked over to where a broken table leg lay on the floor, the same piece of metal Hyunwoo had wielded like a precision instrument. Your brother did not lose control tonight. Quite the opposite. What you witnessed was the most controlled violence I have ever seen. I don't understand, said the Hive Lord merchant. Of course you do not. You think violence means rage, chaos, destruction. But that is not what human aggression really is. The bartender picked up the table leg and examined it. Human aggression is applied physics. It is psychology weaponized. It is 10,000 years of constant warfare distilled into pure, efficient action. He set the metal piece down carefully. Every human war taught them something new. Every battle was a laboratory for improving their methods. While other species tried to avoid conflict or ritualize it or minimize it, humans embraced it as a learning experience. Dayun felt a chill run down her spine. You make it sound like we are monsters. Monsters? The old Zenthari laughed, a sound like rustling leaves. Child, monsters destroy without purpose. What your brother did tonight had perfect purpose. He neutralized 7 opponents without causing permanent harm, without escalating the situation beyond what was necessary, and without involving innocent bystanders. The bartender gestured around the room. Look at this place. Yes, there is damage, but it is minimal. He could have killed every one of these aliens with his bare hands. I could see it in the way he moved. Instead, he chose exactly the right amount of force to stop the threat and prove his point. But how? Dayun asked. How did he move like that? How did he know exactly what to do? Because every human carries the knowledge of every human war, the Zenthari explained. You study history not just to remember the past, but to learn from it. Every tactical manual, every combat technique, every lesson learned in blood, it all gets passed down, refined, improved. He looked directly at Dayun. Tell me, child, what did you learn at your military academy? Standard curriculum, she replied automatically. Space navigation, emergency procedures, weapons training, hand-to-hand combat, tactical planning, military history. Stop. The bartender held up a hand. Military history. How much military history? Dayun thought for a moment. All of it, I suppose. From the earliest tribal conflicts through the world wars, the space conflicts, right up to current peacekeeping operations. Why? Because that is how humans work, the old Zenthari said with satisfaction. Other species teach their young about their greatest victories. Humans teach their young about every mistake they have ever made, every tactic that worked, every strategy that failed. They turn their entire violent history into an educational tool. The Keth trader spoke up nervously. But surely that just makes them more violent, not less. Does it? The bartender challenged. When was the last time humans fought a war among themselves? Dayun answered without thinking. 83 years ago. The unification conflicts ended when the Earth Defense Force was established. 83 years of peace, the Zenthari nodded. And before that? The resource wars ended 40 years before that. and the ideology wars ended 30 years before that. Da-Un paused, seeing the pattern. Each conflict was shorter and less destructive than the one before it. Exactly. Humans did not eliminate their capacity for violence. They learned to aim it more precisely. They studied every war they fought until they understood how to fight more efficiently, more decisively, more humanely, if such a word can apply, to warfare. The old bartender walked back behind his counter and began cleaning glasses again. Your brother told you he used to do other work. I am guessing he did not deliver cargo during his military service. Da-Un shook her head slowly. Special operations. He was deployed to conflict zones, peacekeeping missions, counterterrorism operations. He saw action on 12 different worlds before he retired. And now he delivers medical supplies and terraforming. Equipment, the Zenthari observed. A man trained to be the most efficient killer in the galaxy who chooses instead to help build new worlds and save lives. Understanding began to dawn on Da-Un's face. That is what you meant about humans being honest about their nature. Your species does not pretend they are naturally peaceful, the bartender confirmed. They know they are naturally dangerous, so they spend enormous effort learning to be dangerous in the right ways, at the right times, for the right reasons, Hia gestured to the unconscious aliens. These fools looked at human military history and saw primitive violence. What they should have seen was the most sophisticated combat education system in the galaxy. Every human soldier learns from every human war. Every mistake is cataloged. Every success is analyzed. Every technique is refined. But we are not. All soldiers, Da-Un protested. Are you not? The Zenthari raised an eyebrow. You said you learned military history, combat training, tactical planning. Do all humans learn these things? Da-Un nodded slowly. Basic education includes physical conditioning, self-defense, emergency procedures, conflict resolution. Conflict resolution, the bartender repeated with amusement. Most species learn to avoid conflict or surrender when it finds them. Humans learn to resolve it, which sometimes means ending it quickly and decisively. He set down his glass and looked around the room at the patrons who had been listening. Do you understand now? Human aggression is not uncontrolled violence. It is the most controlled violence in the galaxy. It is 10,000 years of warfare condensed into training that every human receives from childhood. The Keth trader shifted nervously. That makes them sound terrifying. They should be terrifying, the old Zenthari agreed. But think about this. With all that capacity for violence, with all that training and knowledge, news of the bar fight spread through Nexus Station like wildfire through dry grass. Within hours, every communication network was buzzing with eyewitness accounts, security footage, and wild speculation about what had actually happened at the Nebula's edge. The official report from station security was dry and factual. One human male subdued 7 alien individuals during an altercation at licensed establishment. No permanent injuries reported. Investigation ongoing. But the unofficial versions told a very different story. I saw him move like liquid lightning, claimed a Hive Lord trader who had been 3 tables away. One moment the aliens were laughing, the next they were unconscious on the floor. He threw a table like it weighed nothing, swore a Keth diplomat who had watched the whole thing through the bar's window. A table that takes 4 of us to lift, and he flipped it with one hand. 8 seconds, reported the bar's automated security system when investigators analyzed the timestamps. The entire confrontation lasted 8 seconds from first contact to final opponent neutralized. By the time Admiral So Young arrived on Nexus Station 6 hours later, the story had grown into legend. According to some versions, Hyun Woo had defeated 50 aliens. Others claimed he had done it blindfolded. A few insisted he had used ancient human martial arts that could kill with a single touch. The Admiral found Da-Un waiting in the station's security office, still wearing her academy uniform, but looking like she had aged years in the past few hours. Next to her sat the old Zenthari bartender who had volunteered to give a statement about what he had witnessed. Da-Yun, Admiral So-Young said as she entered the small interrogation room. Are you all right? Da-Yun nodded, though her eyes were still wide with shock. Yes, ma'am. But Hyun-woo... Admiral, I had no idea he could do what he did tonight. Admiral So-Young was a small woman with gray-streaked hair and the kind of calm expression that came from dealing with crises for 30 years. She had commanded Star Destroyers during the Outer Rim conflicts and negotiated peace treaties with hostile alien species. Very little could surprise her anymore. But when she read the security report and watched the surveillance footage, she sat in silence for a long time. Admiral, Da-Yun finally asked, is my brother in serious trouble? No, So-Young replied slowly, but we might be. She turned to the old Zenthari. Sir, I understand you spoke with the other patrons after the incident. What was their reaction? The bartender's ancient eyes met hers steadily. Fear, Admiral, and respect, but mostly fear. Of Hyun-woo specifically, or of humans in general. Both, I think. They are beginning to understand that they have been making some very dangerous assumptions about your species. Admiral So-Young rubbed her temples, feeling the beginning of a headache. This is going to cause problems. Admiral? Da-Un said carefully. What did Hyun-woo do in special operations? His service record is classified above my clearance level. The Admiral looked at the young woman for a long moment, then made a decision. Your brother was part of the Ghost Protocol program. Deep reconnaissance, behind enemy lines operations, high-value target elimination. He was deployed to situations where regular military forces would be too visible or too slow. Target elimination, Da-Yun repeated, quietly. You mean assassination? Among other things, yes. The Ghost Protocol operatives were trained to operate alone in hostile territory for months at a time. They had to be able to blend in anywhere, fight anyone, and complete their missions regardless of opposition. So, Young paused. Your brother was one of the best we ever trained. The Zenthari bartender leaned forward. Admiral, if I may ask, how many humans like him are there? That's classified. So-Young replied automatically, then reconsidered. But I suppose the galaxy is going to find out soon enough. The Ghost Protocol program graduated approximately 2,000 operatives before it was discontinued 5 years ago. 2,000, the bartender repeated thoughtfully. And they are all now civilians? Most of them. Some stayed in the military and advisory roles. Others went into private security, law enforcement, or exploration services. A few, like Hyun-woo, chose completely peaceful careers. The Admiral's expression darkened. They all received the same training, though. Da-Un was beginning to understand the implications. Admiral, you said we might be in trouble. What did you mean? Before So-Young could answer, her communication device chimed with an urgent priority message. She read it quickly, and her expression grew even more concerned. The Galactic Council has called an emergency session, she announced. Representatives from 17 species are demanding an immediate review of humanity's membership status. Because of a bar fight? Da-Un asked in disbelief. Because of what the bar fight revealed, the Admiral corrected. The footage has been analyzed by military experts from every major species. They are all reaching the same conclusion. She stood up and began pacing the small room. For the past 3 years since humanity joined the Council, we have been careful to present ourselves as explorers, traders, and diplomats. We emphasized our scientific achievements, our cultural contributions, our peaceful intentions. That was the right approach, Da-Un said. Was it? Because what happened tonight suggests that every human civilian might actually be a trained warrior. Every human ship might be carrying combat specialists. Every human colony might be defended by People with military expertise that rivals or exceeds the best special forces in the galaxy. The Xanthari bartender nodded slowly. They are realizing that they have been negotiating with a species that could potentially conquer them all. But we would never, Da'un began. Would you not? So Young interrupted. Daeun, what is your civilian specialty? What did you plan to do after your military service? Terraforming engineering. I wanted to help design new colony worlds. And your brother became a cargo pilot. What other careers do former military personnel choose? Da'un thought about her academy classmates, about the veterans she knew. Exploration, trade, medical services, education, engineering. All peaceful professions, the Admiral agreed, but every single one of them places humans throughout the galaxy, on trade routes, in colony systems, at research stations, in diplomatic missions. The implications were staggering. Da'un looked at Admiral So Young with dawning horror. They think we have been infiltrating the galaxy. Have we? The Xanthari asked quietly. Admiral So Young stopped pacing and looked at both of them. Not intentionally, but from an outside perspective, it might look that way. Humans with advanced combat training spreading throughout known space, taking positions in critical infrastructure, transportation, and communication networks. But they chose those careers because they wanted peaceful lives, Da'un protested. I know that. You know that. But does the Galactic Council know that? The Admiral sat back down and pulled up a holographic display showing human population distribution across the galaxy. Look at this. In just 3 years, we have humans working on over 400 worlds. Every major trade route has human cargo. Pilots. Every significant colony has human engineers, doctors, or teachers. The display showed a web of connections spreading out from Earth to every corner of civilized space. From the Council's perspective, it looked like a carefully planned military deployment. Admiral, Da'un said slowly, what if they decide we are too dangerous to remain in the Council? That is the best-case scenario, So Young replied grimly. The worst case is that they decide we are too dangerous to remain in the galaxy. The back room fell silent as they contemplated the possibility of humanity being declared a hostile species, banned from Council space, or worse. Finally, the old Xanthari spoke up. Admiral, may I make a suggestion? Of course. Do not try to hide what you are, he said simply. The truth has a way of coming out, as tonight proved. Better to control how it comes out than to let fear and speculation guide the narrative. Admiral, So Young looked at him thoughtfully. What do you mean? Tell them exactly what human aggression really is. Not the sanitized diplomatic version you have been presenting, but the truth. Show them that humans are dangerous, yes, but dangerous, in ways that make the galaxy safer, not more violent. How do we do that? The bartender smiled, his ancient eyes twinkling with something that might have been mischief. You let them meet more humans like your cargo pilot. Let them see that the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy choose to deliver medical supplies and build new worlds. Admiral So Young stared at him for a long moment, then slowly began to smile as well. Da'un, she said, how would you like to make your first assignment something a little more challenging than deep space? Patrol? Ma'am. Pack your bags. We are going to the Galactic Council, and we are taking your brother with us. 3 weeks later, the great assembly hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with tension that could be felt across species barriers. Representatives from 47 different worlds filled the massive amphitheater, their various forms of communication, creating a symphony of clicks, hisses, harmonic vibrations, and translated speech. At the center of it all stood Commander Tae Jin, Earth's senior representative to the Council. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair and the calm bearing of someone who had spent years in diplomatic service. Behind him sat Admiral So Young, Da'un in her dress uniform, and Hyunwoo, who looked distinctly uncomfortable in formal civilian clothes. The session had been going on for 6 hours already. Representative after representative had stood up to express their concerns about humanity's deceptive infiltration of galactic society. The Vorthak delegation, led by a still-healing Kethvar, had been particularly vocal about the clear and present danger that humans represented. "The evidence speaks for itself," Kethvar was saying, his crystalline form still showing stress fractures from his encounter with Hyunwoo. "Humans have systematically placed trained warriors throughout our space under the guise of civilian occupations. This represents a massive military deployment disguised as peaceful immigration." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. The Keth representative, an elder diplomat named Visatara, rose to speak next. "My government has conducted a thorough review of human personnel in our territory," she hissed, her scales shifting to the deep blue of serious concern. "In every case, these so-called civilians possess military training that exceeds our own special forces capabilities. How are we to interpret this except as preparation for conquest?" Commander Tae-jin listened patiently to each accusation, making notes but not interrupting. When the formal complaints phase finally ended, the council speaker, a ancient wise, one from the first species, called for humanity's response. Tae-jin stood slowly and walked to the center of the speaking circle. For a moment, he simply looked around the vast chamber, making eye contact with representatives from dozens of worlds. "Honored delegates," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. "You have accused my people of deception, of infiltration, of preparing for war while claiming to seek peace. I stand before you today to tell you that you are absolutely correct." The chamber erupted in shocked exclamations. Several representatives immediately began calling for humanity's expulsion from the council. Others demanded military action against human-occupied worlds. Tae-jin waited for the noise to die down, then continued with the same calm voice. "You are correct that every human in your territories possesses military training. You are correct that our civilians are capable of combat effectiveness that rivals your best warriors. You are correct that we have not been entirely transparent about these capabilities." He paused. "But you are completely wrong about why." He gestured to the display screens around the chamber, which began showing images of human history. Not the sanitized diplomatic version, but the raw, brutal reality of 10,000 years of warfare. "My people have never hidden what we are," Tae-jin said as images of ancient battles, medieval sieges, and modern conflicts filled the screens. "We are a species that survive by becoming very, very good at fighting. Every technique of war, every tactic of combat, every strategy of violence, we have studied them all, refined them all, perfected them all." The images shifted to show human military academies, training facilities, and educational programs. What you call military training, we call basic education. What you call combat expertise, we call survival skills. Every human child learns these things not because we are preparing for war, but because we refuse to be helpless when war finds us. A Hive Lord representative stood up, his mandibles clicking with agitation. "Then you admit you are a warrior species, masquerading as civilians?" "No," Tae-jin replied firmly. "We are civilians who refuse to be victims." He walked closer to the Hive Lord section of the assembly. "Tell me, delegate, what happens when your colony worlds are attacked by pirates? When your trade ships encounter hostile forces? When your diplomats are threatened by terrorists?" We call for military assistance," the Hive Lord admitted reluctantly. "And if that assistance cannot arrive in time, the insectoid representatives' compound eyes flickered. "Then casualties are accepted as unavoidable." "Unacceptable," Tae-jin said flatly. "Humans find that completely unacceptable. We refuse to accept that civilians should be helpless. We refuse to accept that non-combatants should be defenseless. We refuse to accept that anyone should die simply because they cannot fight back." He gestured to Hyunwoo, who had been sitting quietly throughout the session. "You have met my colleague, the cargo pilot. You have seen what he can do when threatened, but let me tell you what he chooses to do instead." The display screens now showed footage of Hyunwoo's recent cargo runs. Medical supplies being delivered to plague-stricken colonies, terraforming equipment being transported to new worlds, emergency rations being rushed to disaster zones. "This man could conquer planets," Taejin continued. "Instead, he saves lives. He could lead armies. Instead, he builds new worlds. He could destroy civilizations. Instead, he chooses to help them grow." Admiral So Young stood up from her seat. "Commander, if I may?" Taejin nodded, and the Admiral walked forward to join him in the speaking circle. "Delegates, I have served in the Terran military for 35 years. I have seen combat on 17 worlds. I have commanded star destroyers and led peacekeeping operations. And I can tell you that every human in this galaxy made the same choice my cargo pilot friend made. They chose to use their capabilities to build rather than destroy." She gestured to the assembly. "You fear us because you think we are warriors, pretending to be civilians. The truth is more frightening and more wonderful than that. We are civilians who happen to be warriors. Every human doctor, engineer, teacher, and trader you have encountered could probably defeat your best soldiers in single combat, and they choose instead to heal, build, educate, and trade." Da-un rose from her seat as well, joining the other humans in the speaking circle. Her voice was strong and clear as she addressed the assembly. "I graduated from the Terran Defense Academy 3 weeks ago. My training included combat tactics, weapons systems, battlefield medicine, survival techniques, and psychological operations. By your standards, I am a walking weapon." She paused. "My specialty is terraforming engineering. I want to help design worlds where your children and my children can grow up together in peace." She looked directly at Kethvar. "You called humans aggressive and violent. You were right. But you completely misunderstood what human aggression really means." The young officer walked closer to the Vorthak delegation. "Human aggression is not uncontrolled violence. It is the absolute refusal to be helpless. It is the determination to protect what we love at any cost. It is the decision to be capable of terrible things so that we never have to watch terrible things happen to others." Murmurs began to ripple through the assembly again, but this time they sounded different, thoughtful rather than fearful. Commander Taejin took control again. "Delegates, you have a choice to make today. You can expel humanity from the Council out of fear of what we might do, or you can welcome us as partners who have chosen to use our capabilities to make the galaxy safer for everyone." He gestured to the screens, which now showed human peacekeepers, human medical teams, human engineers working alongside alien colleagues on dozens of worlds. "Look at what we have actually done since joining the Council. Piracy in human patrolled. Sectors is down 60%. Colonial disasters have been responded to 40% faster thanks to human emergency services. Trade disputes involving human mediators are resolved with 70% less violence." The chamber fell silent as delegates absorbed this information. "We are not infiltrators or conquerors," Taejin concluded. "We are the species that refuses to let bad things happen when we have the power to prevent them. We are the people who choose to be strong so that others can afford to be gentle." He walked back to the center of the speaking circle and faced the council speaker. "Honored Speaker, humanity requests to remain in the Galactic Council not despite our aggressive nature, but because we have learned to use that nature in service of peace." The ancient wise one studied the human delegation for a long moment, then spoke in a voice that carried the weight of millennia. "The council will recess for deliberation." 4 hours later, the session reconvened. The council speaker stood and announced the decision that would shape the galaxy's future. After extensive deliberation, the Galactic Council has voted to not only maintain humanity's membership, but to expand it. Earth is hereby granted additional representation and invited to take a leading role in galactic security operations. The chamber erupted in surprised chatter from some delegations and approving sounds from others. Furthermore, the speaker continued, the Council formally recognizes that true civilization is not the absence of the capacity for violence, but the wisdom to apply that capacity only when necessary and only in defense of peace. 6 months. Later, the Nebula's Edge reopened under new management. The elderly Zenthari bartender had decided to retire.